Well, good afternoon, everybody. Thank you for watching this video. This is a recorded Zoom interview. Do you recognize this guy? This is Google Earth by Glenn Cruickshank. And if you were not part of us, and part of our scene this winter with the Ice Age floods A to Z, I'm not sure this interview is going to have much meaning to you. But this is yet another follow-up to this incredible series of J. Harlan Brett's programs. And I say incredible because we made a bunch of new discoveries together, and Glenn was a big part of it. And we wrapped the whole thing up in February. And then there was a meeting in Spokane that Glenn spent a lot of hours putting together with a bunch of these Ice Age floods geologists in mid-May. And then that was it for me. I was on to the Cascade volcanoes and not really looking back, but I kept getting emails from Glenn, from Jim O'Connor, from Richard Waite. And so we're doing this next or maybe final follow-up to the Ice Age floods. One never knows by hearing what Glenn has been up to. So I have not heard and seen what Glenn has. I wanted to save it for this. But Glenn, thanks publicly again for all that you did this past winter, but also that special weekend in May. How are you today?
I'm doing great. Thanks, Nick. Trying to stay out of the heat here in Spokane.
Yes,
Uh, but
likewise.
I'm staying busy.
Yes, well, you have been. So I know you have some slides, and I'm sure you must have some Google Earth as well. And I'm hoping you're okay if I just butt in every once in a while and ask for a little bit more detail, but otherwise, can't wait to see what you've come up with. Can you give us an overview, or maybe that's your first slide? Like, what is the topic today, and what are you still working on, and who are you working with?
Well, as you said earlier, you thought you were done, but we're not done yet. Uh, so you started that snowball rolling down the hill,
Yeah.
and there's a lot of work being done now on this. I mean, we're not done with the floods. I'm doing work with most of the people who are on that series with you, one way, shape, or form, or another. So whether it's Richard or Jerome or Jerome, we're working with all of them on various parts of the project. Sky Cooley working on terraces with him. I'll go into that a little bit later. So, but what started this though was in January or February we were talking about Bretz, but we also said what's the deal with Pardee?
Yes.
Uh, what's
Joseph
what's his
Pardee.
role in all of this? And it was
Yes.
sort of, and historically, Pardee has been sort of the afterthought, or well, yeah, he did the floods, he did Missoula, but Bretz did all the heavy lifting. So Jim O'Connor worked to track down some of the archives. Both he and BK McDonald as well, which is Thomas Large's great grandson.
Yes.
But there's been a lot of stuff going on behind the scenes. Jim got a request into the USGS archives in Denver. If you think of the Indiana Jones archives with those log rows of boxes, apparently USGS has that. He got 4 boxes of Pardee field notes from the archives, got them shipped to Portland. He did some of the scanning, and he got an intern or somebody to help him scan those notes in. So I did the exact same thing again that I did with the Bretz files. Went through, geolocated what we could, and that's what we're going to kind of go today is kind of a review, a report of those notes.
So the notes, the Joseph Pardee notes, is it safe to say nobody's really seen those, or just a handful of people?
I don't think anyone's seen them. Again, they were in the USGS archives. And to what we've discussed, no one's ever seen these notes before. So you and Jim O'Connor have seen them, and I have, but this will be the first really that anyone's seen these notes.
Okay, one more preliminary then before we launch in, and I hope I don't steal some of your thunder, but viewers, Joseph Pardee has been part of the Ice Age flood story for decades. He's the guy that wrote about Glacial Lake Missoula before Bretz arrived. He's the guy that published Glacial Lake Missoula details and the giant current ripples after Bretz kind of left the channeled scablands.
Yes.
But it was not clear that Joseph Pardee knew about the flood work or the flood deposits or any evidence of Ice Age floods in eastern Washington. That was Bretz's thing.
Mm-hmm.
And we're going to learn from Glenn here that
That's not quite how it went.
not exactly how it went. So this is really exciting. So
Yeah.
let's go, Glenn. Thank you.
So let's go into my what they call the lantern slides,
Okay.
and we're going to do this also. This is not so much geology today as it is the history of all of this.
Yes.
I know you really get wrapped around that, and I do too.
Yeah.
That's been the fun digging through this. So this was a completely different. These notes were completely different than Bretz's. This was a harder project, actually, and we'll see in a minute.
Okay.
So I'm going to go ahead and share my screen.
Thank you. Thank you. Yeah,
And,
viewers, as Glenn does
to,
that, we've got all sorts of Cascade Volcano stuff coming for you in the next year or so, but this is fun to go back and look at some of this. I can see that lantern slide. Thank you, Glenn.
Okay. So on the right, of course, is just a quick little graphic of overview of where Pardee was, and we'll go back to that later. But again, his notes. So first of all, I have a correction from our last show when we talked about Bretz's stuff. I thought I had his typewriter figured out, and afterwards, working with Richard Waite and with Sharon from Magala, we're revising our typewriter story.
Okay.
Typewriter was doing, and it's a funny story. Memoirs, which is Bretz's handwritten, unpublished biography. Richard has a copy of that, and he talks about so Bretz, we believe, uses Hammond multiplex typewriter.
Okay.
But Bretz writes about typewriter theft at the University of Chicago campus back in those days. He had one of only 3 multiplexes on campus, so he hides it. Then he forgets he hides it. He reports it stolen, and then years later he finds it buried under some map cases in his office.
Okay, good. So that's Richard Waite in Portland for the USGS, and that's Sharon from Malaga, Washington. Wonderful.
Yeah, I've been working with them pretty much not daily now on another project, and I'll talk about that later. But this was the project. Apparently, these typewriters, they made a lot of them during World War I. This even has had the olive drab coloring on it, but we believe that this was the typewriter that he used. We spent a lot of time looking at the typefaces and matching the curlicues below the letters and things like that. So I'm retracting my earlier Remington portable, and we're going with the Hammond.
Very good.
But we have been also, and part of this was debate, is trying to figure out when Bretz typed his notes. Did he do it every night in the field? Did he wait till he got back on the train, and so forth? So that's part of another story that we'll get into a little bit later. Okay. So next slide. If I go down here. So here's sort of some general observations about the notes that we got. Again, thanks to Jim O'Connor for getting those boxes down. Almost 900 pages of slides or of handwritten notes. But not all of them are related to the scablands. Again, Pardee had a long career as a USGS minerals expert. He'd had a lot of different projects that he worked on, and these notes included mining reviews up in the Colfax Reservation. They included an awful lot of work in Montana. I chose at this point not to geolocate all of his Lake Missoula flood work. Maybe that's a later story, but what I was really looking for is I wanted to look for the intersect between Bretz and Pardee. Right, and understand what each one of them contributed, and more importantly, almost when did they contribute for that. So 900 pages of notes, but not all Scabland. Pardee's notes, however, are not organized like Bretz's were. They were not chronological. So we've never had, until now, this chronology of where Pardee went week by week, year by year, in the eastern Washington, northern Idaho area. So now this is the first time that we've ever been able to create that. And by getting these in Google Earth and letting us resort them, we can do that now.
Okay.
Pardee was all over the Spokane region and the upper Scablands well before Bretz. 12 years before Bretz is where he started. So he got quite a bit of work done even before Bretz showed up. As I mentioned, Pardee's notes were arranged by a geological theme, and he would resort he had apparently a number of different notebooks that he traveled with, and if he was going to write down glaciers, glacial evidence, he would write that in one notebook. If he wanted to write about terraces, he'd write that in another notebook. So you had to kind of go through and get all those notes from the various pieces and reassemble it. It was a lot more work than the Pardee notes to do.
Huh.
But I also got a sense that his Scabland work was really opportunistic. In other words, he didn't have a mandate or an assignment to go to figure out the Scablands. It was kind of incidental to the other work that he was doing as a USGS geologist. So you'd see a day here where he'd write some flood observations down, but he wasn't working on the floods primarily. It was sort of, as I said, opportunistic.
Yes, but if I can jump in, Glenn, the story that's been told for so long that high school teacher in Spokane, Thomas Large, invites Pardee and Bretz to look around the Spokane area and what they thought, that story is suddenly not the story, because here's this guy who has been spending like much of the teens, right, looking at the Scablands. Wow.
Yeah. So we're going to touch on a few of those things today. So that was one of the things that's really interesting. So I did put this slide together a little bit this was the early years of Bretz or Pardee, I should say.
Yep.
I'm gonna apologize up front for being dyslexic on this. Last night I had to do a presentation to about 50 people at a senior center on Pardee. So I'm out doing lectures and this stuff now.
Right, nice.
Kind of crazy. So I did an hour and a half Bretz and Google Earth lecture last night, and then today is Pardee. So bouncing around a little bit.
Yeah. Well,
Pardee was born 1871, Salt Lake City. Mining family.
Okay.
His dad was a big time miner, bought mines all over the West. He was pretty influential. So Pardee grew up upper class and did that. He moved to Phillipsburg, Montana, right away. He was like a year or 2 years old, and that's where he really grew up. Phillipsburg didn't have a high school, so he went straight from elementary school to college. When he was 15 years old, he started college at Deer Lodge, and he was there for a couple years. And then he transferred to University of California at Berkeley, and he graduated after 5 years of study. In those days, colleges didn't let you show or transfer credits. There was no transfer portal for geologists in college. But he spent about 18 years actually as a miner, operating mines and exploring. He was a postmaster a little bit as well, and this was both in Montana, and he was over by Baker City, Oregon, when he did that. But in 1908, he said, "The heck with it. I'm going to go back to Stevensville, and I'm going to be a music teacher." And so he starts teaching music, but right away he does volunteer field mapping for USGS. And so this would be 1908 and 1909, and he's hired as a temp worker for USGS. He just worked summers and as a resource expert, but he was a temp. But he finally gets hired as a junior geologist by USGS on July 11th, 1910. And that date's kind of important because we'll see in just a minute. So he at his mandatory retirement at age 70, but he lived in Washington, D.C. Pretty much during his entire career, and then he, I guess, commuted out west.
Oh, really? So that's why he was at the Cosmo Club meeting in 1927. He was living back there.
He lives there, yeah.
Ah,
Uh, and then he retired back to Phillipsburg to live with his daughter, and he's buried there.
okay.
So I'm going to switch over to Google Earth
Very
and
good.
go to Stevensville. And we're going to fly down to his house he had 160 acres that they bought in Stevensville, Montana. This is where his house, his property was. Interestingly, right up the creek here, he owned a bunch of placer mines. This was his mining area here
Ah,
in 1901, and he owned a bunch of placer mines, gold mines, but they were just up the road from where his house was. He also, some of the reports. Oh, so by the way, because of the way Pardee's notes were organized, I had to change my naming schema for the notes. So Pardee, page 32. The 4187 is the USGS extension number on their documents. So they
ah,
had USGS put some numbers on them. This lets you track back. And then the year 19. So this is 1920 for the year. Here he actually has this erratic that's still sitting there today. He found that in 1920, and that erratic is still sitting there today.
I love it.
So also, interestingly, he could see from his house. We tip this down a little bit. Right. Over across the field, a couple miles away, was this place called Cowell Buttes. Unfortunately, that's not what's called in a topological map. That's just what they called it locally. But that comes into play as we go back to the slides. He started again at USGS in June, but he's out in the field before he's actually gets appointed. And this is where his notes pick up. June 8th and 9th of 1910 is the first earliest note that we have of his field notes. The work that he did as a temp, we don't have those notes, but when he started for the USGS, now the notes became official U.S. government property, I think, and that's where it all sort of starts. But interestingly, 1910, he's already talking about a delta in Lake Missoula.
Ah,
So how does he know that?
right, right.
How does he know that? Well, it turns out he's been working out in the field a little bit beforehand because his very first paper comes out in May of 1910, long before he's even a USGS geologist.
Interesting.
So this is the glacier. This is on glacial Lake Missoula. Ice dammed, lake filled, large part of drainage bases, Clark Fork, ice dammed. And he's already seen that in 2010. This picture, this is actually a hand drawing. This is of the Cowell Buttes, and it shows the strand lines from the floods. This is the belt that he saw from his yard.
Yeah,
So
yeah.
he traced his paper from his backyard. And you can still see strand lines along the hill there. So he was living right in the. I mean, he could see that there was a lake here from his house in 1909 and 1910, which was kind of
very cool and very early. And just to remind the viewers that Pardee did not come up with the concept of glacial Lake Missoula. We go back to T.C. Chamberlain in 1885 and maybe one other little grad student in the late 1890s. But to have Pardee pick up on that as he's a volunteer, right? Like before he's legit, he published that paper before he became a USGS permanent employee. Very cool, Glenn.
That's really cool. I thought that was really kind of a surprise.
Yes.
But what was also interesting is back to previous slide is he goes to Hope, Idaho, which is Hope is right next to where the ice dam was. So
Oh,
we'll see that in a second when he goes over to Clark Fork, Idaho. But his very first assignment is right where the ice dam was. Now, it wasn't to do that, but he was assigned there to go out and check an oil and gas claim.
I see.
So if we go back up to Hope here, get up to my screen.
You're doing
So
great. Everything is working smoothly. From my end, the Zoom is a little, sorry, the Google Earth is a little choppy, but it is able to catch up with you. So keep rolling here. This is great, Glenn.
Cool. So here's this is Hope, Idaho. For those who Lake Pardee here, and the environs. But if you leave Hope, if you take a boat over, this is the mouth of the Clark Fork River, and this is where obviously the ice dam was. But this was the very first project that Bretz or that Pardee went to look for on oil and gas coming out the delta of the Clark Fork River. Which is really strange. That's not really known for that, but he actually found, so I'm going to switch to the notes here. Let's see if you can keep up. So here's this note. This is what the notebooks look like. And here's that very first page of notes.
Oh, wow.
And he's off to Hope, Idaho. They've got a new water tank. He gets in at 1:45 on June 12th. But this is the start of his notes, where he takes a boat over to by motor boat to the North Fork of the Clark Fork River. So I think it's ironic almost that the ice dam, is central to this whole thing. And in his career, that's where he starts his whole friggin' USGS career.
Right.
That was kind of amazing.
Huh.
And he actually had somebody sample the methane gas that was coming off. And they did all sorts of scientific measurements of this methane. I think it was probably just logs buried in the delta that were decomposing. But that's where he starts his field work.
At middle age, right? He's like in his early 40s or late 30s, maybe something like that.
So he'd be in his 40s. Well, he's born in 1980 or 1881.
Yeah.
So he's already middle aged as he's doing this.
Huh.
So the very first paper, Glacial Lake Missoula, Journal of Geology, backyard pictures of the strand lines. So I put together. So this is kind of one of the analysis that I did to figure out where he was and what he did and where they overlapped. So on the left-hand side is Bretz's field work and the papers that he wrote. And we've got 18 papers that Bretz wrote, starting with some Puget Sound work, but his field work started in 1922, and Bretz did all of his work. Pardee, all of his work was largely done by 1922. He did the paper in 1910. He did a paper on the Latah Formation with Brian. Kirk Bryan, who was a USGS geologist. Most of this field work in here fed into Latah Formation paper. And then there's just nothing until 1940 when he did his ripple marks, and 1942 when he did the other half of that story. And meanwhile, Bretz is out here cranking stuff out for that. So this is sort of how they lined up in terms of field work and the overlap or not the overlap. The caveat, of course, is for like 60 days in 1912, he doesn't have notes for every day. He's doing other things, and that's kind of, he was in that area doing what all. So that's a little bit misleading, but that gives you some comparison to the two men and when they were doing the work and what came out of that.
Very cool to see that, Glenn. And is it safe to say that all those orange field days for Pardee, he was never assigned to work on the Ice Age floods? It was always like a side project kind of a thing?
Yeah, I really think so. He just made observations out in the field, and because the way he did his notes, there were almost no field notes that were related to mining in this collection of things. Those field notes were somewhere else, but they weren't really part of this story.
I see. Huh.
So I think the way he organized things was simply to say, I'm going to put my glacier stuff in this book, and I'm going to put my mines in this book.
Yeah. Yeah.
So yeah, he was doing other work, and this was a side gig, I guess, for lack of a better term.
Very fun.
So, but they almost crossed paths. Pardee was in Spokane on Latah Creek on July 4th, and Bretz was there a couple weeks later. Pardee was in Washtenaw in September. Bretz beat him there by a couple of days. So this is as close as I got him to being in the same town at the same time at the same thing. So they were almost together, but that's the only two that we have.
Here's a question. We know from this past winter that Thomas Large was a regular pen pal with Bretz, and Bretz would check in with Large almost every summer. Do we know if there was much back and forth between Pardee and Large? And if so, wouldn't Large want to get these guys together somehow?
Hey, hold on for that question. I'll get to. I got an answer.
Okay, good.
We'll get there. So this is kind of how he did topics. There are pages on just gravel, and there are pages on erratics, and this was his on Lake Missoula. These are how he organized his notes for his work on Lake Missoula. Huh. If I go to 2163, I'm going to go to another note here. Let's see. I got to drag this out of the way.
Glenn, you are out of control. You are officially complete. I mean, I said you were out of control before. It was an understatement. This is wild, man.
It's been a really fun project, I tell you,
man.
And just discovering this stuff has just been just a lot of fun. So here, field records file, U.S. Geological Survey, Geological Division. I think these things went into the archive, and they've been there ever since.
Wow.
And no one's seen these, but you can see. So here's his. This notebook is just Western Montana, but you have to be careful because other stuff was mixed in, and I'll show you that in a little bit. But here's, he's got a pretty detailed index. He's over in the Blackfeet, and he's on the Flathead, and then just lots of different places over in Montana where he's working in these notes, and a lot of them. So these look more like field notes compared to what you saw with Bretz's long sentences and stuff. These are somewhat scribbly. You've got some hand-drawn sketches in there. Kind of all over, and it takes a while I had to read all of this stuff, but some of it I just sort of skipped through. But so here's just glacial drift, and he would make some notes on 1923 about glacial drift, and then you'd find some other notes in 1920 later in the book. So they're all out of order as well. Old drift in the Flathead Valley, and again, his handwriting is not too bad. But it takes a while to study words and try to figure out what he's saying.
Sure.
But this is the material that we're working with and we're talking about here. Some pretty amazing hand drawn. I'll get it turned around here.
Wow.
That's pretty elaborate. McDonald Lake over in Glacier Park. That's a pretty detailed drawing that he's got there.
Yes.
For that. So that was the way he arranged the topics. Let's see. So Pardee camped out. This is in 1912. He's got notes, and this is up on the Columbia River, up on the Colville. But he's camping out on the bench at Stimson's Ferry. He's over by Peach Beach, and in that area. So he's camping out as he's doing his field work, at least in 1912. He's riding steamboats. This is down by St. Mary's, Idaho. This is the steam wheeler. What's it called? The Flyer.
Yeah.
This is a steamboat that was a commuter boat on Lake Coeur d'Alene in 1910. He got off the train and got on the boat and did a tour of Lake Coeur d'Alene. So he's by boat. Here's a picture of his horse, Des Pelham, kind of ratty looking horse. But that was one of his horses that he rode. This is an interesting comment here. The negative destroyed by the authority of the administrative geologist.
Huh.
So they made a note that they canceled the slide on that.
Interesting.
Bretz did not invent observation card geology.
Hey.
Pardee was doing it too in 1917, riding the train, the Olympian train from Spokane west. But his handwriting is pretty elaborate and kind of nice for that. So here's a Pardee. By 1911, he thinks glaciers are already downtown Spokane.
Hello.
Yeah. And as you well know, that was part of our discussion when everyone was out here after the GSA is where did the glaciers go, and how come we thought they were there? Well, Pardee's already seeing glaciers in downtown Spokane.
It is certain that the glacier extended at least within 3 miles of the center of Spokane. Okay.
Yeah. Unbelievable. It's such a hellacious mass of log subangular fragments could be transported to their present location by any other means. Couldn't figure out how the rocks got there other than it had to be brought here by a glacier.
I see.
He's still not on, he hasn't made the flood connection yet for that.
Yeah, he just published the Glacial Lake Missoula paper the previous year.
Yes, I know. That's the thing. Next year, he's doing that. So again, here we're 11 years before Pardee even shows up in town.
Yeah.
This is another interesting note. We had talked with Bretz about using an aneroid barometer to figure elevations. Pardee is too, except this is 1940. They're still using the barometers and doing correction factors to track altitudes.
Wow.
So they all did it the same way there.
Yeah.
This was a fun note. Expense reports. He tracks down. This was his meals and tea bags and a newspaper. But these are tax exempt because he's a government employee. So, but he's tracking it. There's a can opener, a sink stop, some nails.
Wow.
This is the expense report, and I found that just quite interesting to do that, to find that. We talked about Pardee and those guys in the area. Here's Thomas Large writing that both of these guys, that Pardee has been in town, and then obviously this paper from 1925 that Pardee and Bryant talking about Pardee being in town in 1922 and 23. So, from anyone reading his papers, they would have known that Bretz would have known that Pardee's already here doing the work.
Right.
And Large was involved too. So it wasn't a secret that they were out here. So this is another one that in 1920, again 2 years before, Pardee is down at Ewan, and he writes about the Palouse country ending and the Coulee country begins. Point overspread by the floods. I'm going to flip over to Google Earth now. We're going to go down to. Why no, I forgot to show you one thing here. We were talking about Washington. Let's fly. We're going to go all the way across the country.
Okay, we're making a trip.
We're making a trip. This is Pardee's house in Washington, D.C.
I love it.
Beautiful little bunch of row houses in Northwest D.C., but this was his house that he lived at here. I'll back up just a little bit here. Yeah, he's in a little bit of a row house. His house was right here. And again, downtown Washington, D.C. The capital is down here. Rock Creek Park is over here. So Pardee, this is where he lives in Washington, D.C. for most of his career. He
you know,
moves back, but this was his house. One of the other people that I have been working with is Ann Wellbrook, and Ann is a historian in Bozeman, Montana, and she is and has been writing a biography of Pardee.
huh.
Not done yet. She's never seen the field notes, but now she has those. But she gave me she has the addresses of where Bretz lives, so we've been trading some data.
Yeah. Well, Glenn, this is it's a kind of a minor part of your program, but it's always bothered me. Why would Pardee travel all the way across the country to go to that Cosmo Club meeting in January of 1927 and then sit there silently? Like, it doesn't make any sense to me. But if he lives so close by, there we go. Makes sense.
Yeah, I didn't. I had the Cosmo Club in here. I had it located earlier,
Okay.
but he doesn't live that far from it. It's downtown here. But yeah, he just walked to the meeting. So yeah, this is where he lived through his USGS career. Back to Ewan.
Back to Ewan.
Back to Ewan. So this was interesting. I'll get back to his back to Idaho.
Something tells me you're not done yet either. You're probably still going to be at threads of this for months, maybe years. Come on, man.
Yep. No, you're right. Let's see. Where's Ewan? Down by Rock Lake. Here's Rock Lake. So Pardee is here in 1920.
Yeah.
And you really can see at this spot, I'll turn this around too, we can see a little bit better. So this is where, he's talking about the flood channels, and you go from, this is the breakout here where it changes from Palouse to Cooley. So he's standing right here, and you can see that's the big Cheney the floodway where the floods went through, and you can see this island here. But he's here already determining that this all was caused by a glacial river washing all the loess away and channeling it into coulees. 1920.
So do you think he was out there for a week totally looking at Ice Age floods, or do you think the main purpose was some sort of groundwater thing or something else?
Yes. So for instance, in 1922, he was doing well surveys for most of the small towns around in eastern Washington. He was going to each little city and getting their well logs. As he's riding the train, he's again continued to make observations. He's a geologist, I guess. So he's writing stuff down as he sees it.
Right.
So the notes don't again, because there's probably some other pages of the notes that relate to the other topic that might have been in another book that we haven't seen.
Okay.
But this is 2 years before Bretz that he's talking about scablands and how they got created.
Wow.
Oil. This is an interesting little one. Not unlike other places in the country back in the 1920s, is there was an oil boom going on, and everybody was trying to, if you're not going to make money off the oil, you make it the money off selling oil shares to non-existent oil wells. So this was all in his, this was crumpled up in his notes. And you see it's actually, but there's the record stamp there. Come see the oil at night at 1029 Southeast Boulevard. Opportunity to buy stock. And then this government scientist who says the finest oil he's ever seen, ever tested. There's some boosterism there. But these are Pardee's notes here that, it's in a cellar. It's about 6 feet deep. There's a little hole in the ground, and there's some clear liquid that sort of pulls into it. And somebody pulls a gallon out a day. Uh,
Hmm.
but he goes ahead and writes this report, 9/19 of 1921. This is where that oil well was in Spokane right now. But this article, and Sharon's been helping on some of this as well. Within so that's September 19th. This is November 5th.
Yeah.
The Spokesman Review is already saying, "Nah, there's no oil there." And both Thomas Large is quoted as that, and then Bonser is also T.A. Bonser, who taught up in one of the other high schools downtown Spokane also. So these guys are the local, it's kind of like the talking heads on TVs these days. Get a local expert to come in and comment on this.
Right.
Large is a local expert for the Spokane Chronicle, talking about, yeah, there's probably not oil here.
And I think Large had just shown up as well. I think 1921 was Thomas's first year at Lewis and Clark High.
Yes, exactly. Yeah, that's what's happening.
Okay.
So Large is already making the connections with these guys for that.
Right.
So this was in the 1922 paper by Large when he's talking to his own little 1 year later, his own paper. But he says, I'm handing this off to Pardee and to Bretz, who've been out here working already. So he puts in his paper, these two guys are already working on it.
Yeah.
And I found that kind of interesting that he throws it over the transom and says, here, you guys figure it out.
Right.
I tell you, everybody goes to pad tops, from us being there during our trip. But this is 10 years before Bretz was there.
10 years. Look at that.
10 years. Yeah. But it's almost 10 years it's almost a month and day when we were there as well. We were there in May.
Yeah.
June. Interestingly, he's talking about, so Bretz's comments were about a quartz hill up the road, but Pardee's actually talking about the glacial stuff, the railroad cut, the 50-foot bank. We stood right next to it. You saw that gravel bank,
right,
sitting there at Pantops, and he's talking about these 10-foot diameter boulders. Well, these are the ones that there's Richard and Jim and Jerome and everyone's standing there looking at the boulder. So this is where Pardee was 10 years before Bretz.
Huh. And
I found that's interesting. But they all went to Pantops. This was a funny one. It kind of goes back to the Grand Coulee story by Bretz with drunk cooks. But he's over in DeBorgia in Montana. He meets Smith, who's their packer. He's gone, but Scott, who's a cook, he's on a toot. he cooked their supper, but bitching about didn't get a blankety blank cent for it. But the cook is drunk, and in 1919. So you're talking about Large. Here's a well log in 1923 that Large sent to him. So Large was getting well logs and mailing them or somehow getting them to Pardee.
Okay.
So there's another little indication that Large is helping Pardee do his work.
Huh.
And these are just routine well logs that they were collecting, and Pardee was doing it. They were, that's one of the jobs of the geologists at the time, was look for water. And he was looking for artesian water down in the Walla Walla area and in other places as well. So Pardee had his maps were a little bit easier to locate in some respects. Here's down by Lake Pondere, and he's hand drawn some things in. And then here's some current ripples.
Beautiful.
But you know what's coming next.
Sure.
Let's see if I can get back to my notes here.
This is just so excellent, Glenn. This is so excellent, so gripping. Like, these characters are known to us, but to have this whole thing just spill out in front of us. Look at that.
So it gets better.
Come on,
So
man.
this is oops, hit the U key here. This is one of his sections that he drew current ripples on. Uh, and let's see if I can get to the, just a second here. I got to find my map. There we go. Let's see, where did I put it? Oh, I'm in Bretz back up. Okay, so I have to do it this way. Drag this out of the way. So as we do that same fade, you can see his current ripples, how good he was.
Oh,
you can see this way.
crazy. Look at that.
But it actually gets better. So here's an erratic. You follow a little line, and there's a little X right there. And you still see there's still a great big rock sitting.
Look at that. I got goosebumps right now. Holy cow.
There's his X right there, and there's the big giant erratic on his nose. So he's pretty darn accurate on how he does his field mapping. And current ripples are pretty not easy to draw.
Right.
But man, he's got it here. This is over in the Camas Basin. So this is 1939 is when he did that. And that just really, it's so cool to blend this old map and these hand drawings into. He's got these little braddocks up here, and you can still see there's all sorts of little gravel piles up in there as well. So just amazing field work that he was doing back in those days.
Well, Glenn, here's what as you're getting ready for the next little phase here, this is what I'm thinking over and over and over again right now. Why aren't these guys meeting? Why aren't they collaborating? Is there any evidence? Do we really have only one instance where they were in the same room at the same time, and that was the frickin' ambush meeting? Is that our only evidence of those?
That's all we've seen so far. Yeah.
What in the world? Why?
Yeah, I mean they're talking about the exact same thing, and they're just not. They're.
I mean, look at that. And in most of those, each of those spots. And by the way, viewers, this is now available on my website. Is this the time to say that, Glenn? I don't know.
Yes. Yeah. Yes.
So there's a new Google Earth by Glenn file. If you go to nickzentner.com and you find Bretz, you'll find that KMZ file, which has all the Pardee stuff. And most of these years, this is mostly before Brett shows up, correct, Glenn?
Yes. Yeah. If I want to, let's see, let me shrink this down. All of these.
Oh my God.
Here's my Pardee stuff here. That's my Brett's. So if I turn off, I have about 250 Pardee places. So let's turn off anything before 1922.
Okay.
And so there's all of his observations before Brett shows up. So he's over, he's over on the Colville Reservation, but he's also making observations. He's in Grand Coulee.
In Grand Coulee.
In 1920, and he's talking about Lake Lewis, 1920. He's over here in Mansfield. He's up on the ravines looking there. Glacial drift. He's already looking at glacial drift in 1920. Go back to Spokane. He's got right in the rails there. Here's gravel deposits in Marshall. So he is all through here. Erratics in Cheney. He's in Cheney in 1920. So he's kind of he's down at Marengo, which is where you've been before,
right,
at the railroad cut in 1917.
Okay, so I think I have to say it. I don't want to damage the legacy of J. Harlan Bretz, but looking at this, my biggest thought is, how can Bretz putting most of this flood story together after 1 month in August of 1922. It's always bothered me, and I thought maybe it was the Spokane high school teachers that like took him out to a bunch of these spots. But now looking at this, I'm just wondering, did somehow Pardee give his notes to Bretz, or I mean, Bretz is going basically to a bunch of these, or was there a middle? What was Pardee giving all this information to the high school teachers, and then the high school teachers were then?
I think they were doing some intermediary, or they were being the intermediaries between those two men.
They must have. They must have.
Yeah, yeah. Because Sprague. I think where's Sprague out here? Let me turn the rest of because there really wasn't much work in Pardee. Well, so let's hit 22. So in 22, he's out in Sprague with Large.
Large.
So that's he's there looking at a well. Yeah, drove to Spokane back, and he's looking at the well logs. So he's driving around with Large, and this is, let's see, get the date off that one. So this is 6/8 of 22. Bretz comes in on August 1st. So this is like 2 months before.
Right.
And I can't help but thinking Large is, as he talks to Bretz, yeah, I was hanging out with Pardee last month out at Sprague. They had to talk.
Yes.
They had to know what's going on. Because so Large is showing up on both of their calendars, both of their agendas, both of their notes. Wow. He had to explain that stuff.
Right.
If I add a few more, this is the 23rd of 1940s, but he's mostly done his field work. I mean, he's all over Spokane, looking at terraces, well logs as well, but basalt layers and all of that. So he's got a well at the Davenport Hotel he's looking at. That was actually interesting too. Davenport Hotel was the first hotel in the United States to offer cold water to their guests. They had pipes for cold water that came out of their well, which was kind of an interesting aside. But again, you can see how much and how far he was traveling. He's already all the way up up on the terraces up on the Columbia.
Jeez.
He's over at Chelan.
Jeez. I mean, I thought I was done with the floods, Glenn, but I don't know. Maybe I have to try the University of Chicago one more time and see if there's any letters between Bretz and Pardee. If they're there, I don't think I even knew to ask for them, but maybe that would help with some of this. This is such a incredible, that can't be just a coincidence. There's got to be a story here between these two men.
I agree. Yeah, I mean, once you start looking at the where they were and when they were there,
right?
There's a lot of overlap, and again, Pardee is, whether on purpose or accidentally, he's looking at the same things that Bretz is looking at by and large. Now, granted, if I scroll up here, it's not to the same. Let me scroll up. It's not to the same level of magnitude. When I turn on Bretz, it's a whole different.
Right. Right.
But we can see here, those are the railroad cuts down Latah Creek, as they're both. Bretz is there in 22. Pardee is there in 25. So here, Bretz here 23, 22. So they're all within a year going to the same spot. At least in Latah Creek when they're in Spokane, and Large is probably taking them around there. So that's that's something that these notes now tell us, and I think do make the case for they had to be working together, at least understanding each other's data and published reports.
Yes.
Yeah. So back to the maps again. These are just very beautiful maps that he hand drawn.
Yeah, these guys really were they were so gifted artistically. It can't be an accident. Like seems like a bunch of these guys from this vintage, like they graphically can get so much down almost effortlessly in their notebooks. I'm very impressed with that.
And accurate. And
Yes, yes.
here's another beautiful hand-drawn area of Rainbow Lake over in Montana.
Huh,
But just and it's color and he's colorized this one with colored pencils.
love it.
Just a beautiful, beautiful, beautiful maps that we see in those notes. Well, this is an interesting one. So you know about the Great Fire in 1910.
A little bit.
Pardee is over in Missoula during the fire. Here's August 29th, but the fires were August 21st. Smith returned from Wallace, brought my suitcase. Somehow his suitcase ended up in Wallace during the fire. The smoke's starting to thin out a little bit. High wind last night. But he also talks about the McDonald and Pardee escaped from the Slate Creek, which is over the fire area. They lost their camp and one horse in the fire.
Wow.
But they're still reeling from that fire. But somehow Bretz's suitcase or Pardee's suitcase is caught up in that. Huh. I found these little nuggets just really quite interesting as they tie in. So we already saw that erratic that was just by his ranch in 1920. That's still sitting out there in the field for that. Let's see what else. This is interesting. Again, there's erratics. This is only a couple miles from our house. I was out looking earlier this spring for erratics up in the Saltese, and this is one that he writes about. There's this boulder sitting up on top of the Saltese upland areas. That's I was there this year.
Yeah, nice.
But the one that blew my mind though. Let's see if I can move this. There we go. That bar is in my way. Let's see if it's this one. It's this one. Okay, so when I'm going through these notes, we were over on Vancouver Island in mid-May, and I think I might have been in Nanaimo when I did this work. But I'm reading through these notes at night. We're camping, and this notebook has 132 pages, and it's mostly all field reports and lots of stuff from Montana, but not really very useful to me. Glacial something. I can't read where that is. But it's late at night. I'm reading along, and I want to get this thing finished. So I go I'm down to 100-page. Keep going here. Move our pictures off here a little bit. I'm down to the next to the last page, and this book also said Western Montana.
Sure.
I'm reading glacial drift along the north of Lake Pend Oreille. Well, that's kind of interesting. Patches of Clark Fork to Sandpoint. Along the road south of the Pack River crossing are outcrops of granite, and he talks about some drift there. And I'm going, oh my God, because if we look at this is the pin. Fly in here. Reload. So here's this is where he started in Hope.
Right.
This is the mouth of the Clark Fork River.
Yes.
The little town of Hope is right here. The old highway. This is the current Highway 200 that goes out of Clark Fork. The old highway used to run along here, and it crossed Pack River, right? This was the Pack River crossing.
Okay.
It's now the driving range for the Idaho Club Golf Club. This is my aunt's property here.
Oh, wow.
There's another ground, but this is my grandparents' property.
Really?
this is my parents' property, and this is where there's the gravel pit where he got it out of. I used that gravel to bucket it up the hill to make foundations for a cabin back in the 1970s I built.
My God, Glenn Cruickshank, this is your life.
He's there in 1920. My grandparents moved here in 1919. He had to meet my grandparents.
Oh my God, are you kidding me?
Like I say, I'm reading this at 11:30 at night and realizing this. I'm thinking I'm gobsmacked. That's kind of a British term, but this is I am amazed to find out that Pardee that I played these gravel pits. This is where we grew up, right here at the Yeaco places, and now Fish and Game property. But yeah, to find out that Pardee was on our property was pretty amazing.
Glenn, that is so cool. So cool.
It really kind of brought it home for it made it real personal.
Totally.
It really made it personal. So so yeah, this is I did a slide on this, and next to the last page, he had to be there and see the parent. I found that just really, really cool. Didn't expect it. So kind of a wrap up. So he had a lot of knowledge of the scablands by 1922. He had seen the cause. He had seen the fact that I don't understand why he didn't really put those two things together,
right.
And understand how the loess that was washed away was caused by an ice dam sitting upstream that he had already written about.
Right.
Again, he was talking flood carved scablands 10 years before Bretz even got here.
Yep.
I think that they're optimistic. We now have access to his notes, and that's really that's I think kind of huge and really important. And we can chronologically trace his travels with Google Earth. We didn't know from his papers. It was very difficult to understand how he came to those conclusions, and this really sort of helps that. And partly though that to what end? Again, he has no Scabland papers published at all, never other than the Latah formation, and some of that data went into that Latah formation paper, but that really is a little bit different. 3 Lake Missoula papers, 1 Latah, and that was all of his work. That's what drove that.
Huh.
So that's a little bit of the review of the Pardee notes. There were no real geological bombshells in that. I mean, he's talking about the same things Bretz does. His notes do not have train of consciousness that Bretz's notes did.
Right.
Bretz would type. I mean, you've read those, and you see how Bretz would throw out hypotheses and things like that. Pardee really didn't do that in his notes, so that was a little bit different.
Hey, do you want to stop your share unless you have something else to share?
Yeah, no, that was the share on that.
Well, I've got a couple follow-up questions right at the end here, and then I think we'll wrap this one up. This is a truly memorable moment. I mean, come on. I didn't dream it was that powerful. So great job. Can you give us a little feeling then, a little bit more detail about who's been interested in coordinating with you, collaborating with you, emailing back and forth? You mentioned Richard Waite and Sky Cooley and a few others. What is driving them? I think we know you're invested by just getting these notes and doing your thing, but why are they interested in working with you?
Well, like I say, I thought I was retired. I'm not anymore. But so in Richard's case, we are co-authoring a paper. Actually, we're doing a 3-part series for Northwest Science Journal on the Bretz notes.
Really?
First time they've ever done a series. And I've got about 45 pages that Richard and I are working through, covering kind of a reanalysis of the notes. What have we learned that we didn't know before? And Richard's taken, because Richard's written extensively about these floods and about Bretz. He's learning a whole bunch of new stuff too. He'd never seen the notes.
Well, right. I mean, you met Richard for the first time in that field that weekend in mid-May, and I don't think Richard had been to the website and seen those notes. So maybe, do you think he started digging in as soon as we had our weekend?
Yes. Yep. Yeah. And well, he rode with me for 2 days.
Okay.
When we were doing the car, so he was in my car, and yeah, so we had 2 days to talk, and I must have impressed him enough to say, hey, you want to help me write a paper on this?
Right.
So we're doing a 3-part paper that will be out probably at the end of the year. Those journals have a little bit slower time.
Okay.
Sky is working on an inventory of terraces on the Columbia River. And so I'm helping them look at his terraces, but I'm also going through Bretz's notes and Pardee's notes to where they've identified terraces.
Oh.
So I'm pulling terrace data out of their notes and getting that to Sky for his work on identifying all of the terraces, and we're looking at the profiles to see how they formed, where they're at. So I'm doing that. Joel is working on an inventory of giant current ripples. So as I go through the terrace stuff and I go through the notes, we're also finding the current ripples, and I'm getting that thrown into Joel's work. So I'm feeding him data out of these notes. When we were out here at the GSA, we were talking about Excelsior gravels, and that Mike and Linda McCollum from Eastern have been working on discovering those gravels for the last 20 years. We've picked up more interest there. I mean, these are the highly polished quartz pebbles and cobbles that we're finding in a very specific zone. Some of these have that's desert varnish, which is kind of a magnesium coating on it, but it means that these are pretty old rocks. So they call them Excelsior gravels, and they sit on top of the soil that sits on top of the basalt. But in Bretz's notes, he talks about Palouse soil and Spokane drift and gravels. Pardee calls them, he talks about some different types of glacial drift and things like that. Flint called them something different. So what we're doing is I'm going through all of those notes and finding what they call as gravel or old till or things like that. And we're making sure that the McCollums have gone to those sites, and because we're finding, coincidentally or not, that what they call that old gravel is maybe the Excelsior gravel.
I see.
So we're harvesting their observations from 100 years ago and going to check for new places where the McCollums haven't looked. So, for instance, we're going out tomorrow morning at 8 o'clock to go to a gravel pit that Bretz identified that just south of Spokane that they didn't know about. So we're going to go check out that. At the same time, we're gathering sand samples that Jim O'Connor is going to get dated. He's got he's going to get some funding, and we're going to date some of those old sands and gravels using zircon or whatever. I'm not sure what dating mechanism he's going to use. So we're gathering sands for Jim. Let's see, who are we working on?
That's a lot. You're in the middle of everything. And refresh my memory, a year ago in late July of 2023, I think I was just starting to post some of these field notes that I was getting from the University of Chicago. Were you starting to take that stuff and plug it into Google Earth even last summer, or when did that start?
Yeah, no, that was August or September.
Okay.
When you first put out that call to say, hey, where the hell's Pantops?
Right. Oh, right. Yeah. And you said Google Earth's the way to go. I'm just going to start.
I know where Pantops is. I could find it.
Yeah.
And then but at the time you said, well, I've just got this 1922 field note. You failed to mention that there were 9 or 10 other years of field notes.
Right. Oh, right.
Oh, oops.
Ah,
And then then we've got Pardee's notes now, and Flint's and others. So, but we're trying to gather all that old data. Uh, that observational data that Brett's put together. He didn't use all of that in his papers.
yeah, yeah,
We're maybe we can reuse it.
right, right.
So there's still work going on, and I'm trying to help as I can to feed this old data into new research. So yeah, I'm pretty busy writing papers and doing Google Earth stuff and getting out in the field with the McCollums and gathering sand samples for Jim O'Connor and things like that.
Well, maybe this is the way to close it. Like, I think occasionally people ask me about citizen science. Have I heard about citizen science? I'm like, yeah, I guess I know that phrase. And like, have you been doing any of that? And not purposefully, I guess, but you are, I think, the best example of this. You are now collaborating with a number of very well-known scientists who have new study projects directly because of what you were doing. And you have no training in geology, right?
Oh, yeah, right. Yeah, no, other than your 101 class.
But your expertise is playing right into not just one project, but a number. I mean, it is really inspiring, Glenn. So I hope that you're just continuing to really enjoy this. It seems like you are, and
It's a hoot.
yeah,
It's been really it's been rewarding. I'm learning. I mean, to be able to learn stuff from all this whole crowd, I'm really learning a lot. It was sort of weird last night. I'm doing this. I'm up in front of a bunch of other people giving lectures on ice age floods. Like, what the hell am I doing up here? In fact, I asked the people in the crowd, are there any geologists in the crowd? Like, no. Like, good, because I'm not one either. So you're not going to get hard questions. but leveraging that, I mean, I was doing geospatial stuff for 20 years, so this
right.
kind of closes the loop on a little bit, and I guess I wasn't quite ready to retire. Now you got to figure out. Michelle says, "How are you going to get paid for it?" Like, yeah, well, that's probably the wrong business for that. But it has been a lot of fun. I also, like I say, Sharon has been helping. BK McDonald's involved as well. So the whole cast of other citizen scientists
Yes,
we're keeping them busy too.
nice.
So it's a whole kind of community that's sort of working this problem, and it's rewarding. So we're going to keep doing it.
Great job today, Glenn. You hang on the line. I'm going to stop the recording and then we'll talk a little bit more. But before I do that, thank you so much for all that you've done. It's so inspiring, and I hope that people enjoyed this interview. So thank you very much, Glenn Cruickshank.
Thank you, Nick.